So friends, we find that Yosef, this is the story of Yosef, is eminently successful. Ish matzliach. Let's look at his success. Now the Torah says like this. When he was in the house of Potiphar, you know the story, he was sold into slavery. He becomes a servant in the house of Potiphar. So the Torah says, everything which he did, Hashem granted success to his hand. So there's two things I want you to note in this verse. For all that he did, Hashem matzliach biyodoi, God granted success to his hand. And the story develops how Potiphar puts him in charge of his entire household, etc. You know the rest of the story. Potiphar's wife tries to seduce him, not merely because he was an extraordinarily handsome man, but because she saw that they would have children. But she didn't realize it wouldn't be her, but her daughter, Asnat. At any rate, he resists her. And as a result, she has him, she claims that he tried to rape her, and he's cast into the dungeon, to the prison. Now there in the dungeon, this is what we read, and he's appointed there too by the head of the prison to be in charge of all of the prisoners. And there it says, what he did, God grants success, similar to the way the Torah describes his success in the house of Potiphar as a servant. Now he's a prisoner. However, the difference is that here it doesn't say everything, koil, everything, just says what he did, Hashem made successful. In Potiphar's house earlier, it's the word koil appears, and the second distinction is that in the house of Potiphar, it says Hashem granted success to his hand, biyodoi, whereas as a prisoner, the word in his hand doesn't appear. Just whatever he did, Hashem granted success. Why the difference? Why is it that as a servant, let's summarize it, as a servant it says everything he did, and God could grant success biyodoi in his hand, and when he's a prisoner, it's not everything, but not all that he did, just what he did. Not all. And also doesn't say to his hand. So the answer, my friends, is that there's two levels of atzlacha that the Torah is referring to. And they are as follows. The first atzlacha, the success that could be seen on Yosef as a servant in the house of Potiphar was all that he did. Namely, you observe a person, you see him doing something, he's successful. All right? Another thing, oh, he's successful here too. And then another thing and another thing. Then that leads you to the conclusion, this is a person of mazel. He's a successful fellow. And obviously you piece it all together and it all comes from above. But how do you arrive at that conclusion? It's his hand. What he does this, he does that, and the other, and piecing it all together. It's not just luck, not just one time, but all that he does. And the emphasis is his hand. We're looking at his behavior, and we put together a pattern, and we see, oh, this is a mazel-dika person, this is a ish matzliach. That's one level of success. One level of a definition of a successful person that is garnered as a conclusion of putting together the pattern and seeing that all he does, in other words, you look at the act itself, one act alone, not going to call him an ish matzliach, a successful person. Everybody has success in some things. But when you see it happens repeatedly and there's a pattern, oh, he's an ish matzliach. And then, obviously, this is a gift from Hashem that this person, everything he touches, and that is hatzlacha, success. Then there is a higher level of success, hatzlacha, that you look at this person and you don't have to see a pattern. You look at just one thing and you see gewalt. This is a heavenly thing. It's completely beyond. It's completely beyond. In other words, the first one, each individual act, you're going to call him that Hashem granted him success. It's you'll attribute it to his own intelligence, etc. But when it happens repeatedly, this is a unique person that's gifted by God. But it only comes after observing the entire pattern. But then there's a level of Atzlocha, they don't have to see a whole pattern. And you don't have to, and it's not his hand. He did this, he did this, he did this, he did this, and a picture emerges. You look at him once and you see what he does, and you see it's Eibishter. You see that it's God has granted this person Atzlocha. It's patently obvious from his whole demeanor and from what happened that this comes from above. And you don't have to see this in the bigger picture. It's in everything that he does. We see the distinction? It's two levels of success. The first level obviously is you're seeing the person, and then you conclude that it's granted from above. The second one, the person is transparent. You can see at the outset that this is divine. So there's two levels. Now, here comes the beautiful part of the Sikh. So Yosef, level one as a servant. So at the end of the day, his behavior points to God. And what he does, Hashem grants success. But that is arrived at only by observing him after considerable time. But then he achieved a greater level of unity with God, that just watching one thing, you see right away it's divine. You don't have to see a pattern and put it together. Why is that? So friends, everybody knows this is the big foundation Chassidus. What is the vessel for Hashem's blessing is when we get out of the way. And the more we're out of the way, as it were, by that I mean ego, by that I mean taking personal credit, by that I mean arrogance, by that I mean self-serving. The less we are self-serving, the more we are a vessel for Hashem. Quite simply, Hashem is revealed where we let him in. It's a famous story with the Kotzker Rebbe that he asked him as a child, where is God? And he answered, where you let him in. Of course, he's everywhere, but where is he revealed? Where we get out of the way. And what's to get out of the way? Our own sense of independence and ego. So there's a servant and there's a prisoner. For Yosef to be a servant, you have to understand. For Yosef, everything which happens to him in his life is a message from above. Being a servant in the house of Potiphar elevated him to be a servant of God. Being a prisoner is even a greater degree of surrender. A servant is true, it's the servant of a master, but he's still somebody. He does, and what he does is attributed to the master, but he does. If looking at a servant, so what you're seeing is him, but then there's the big picture. Who's he doing this for? It's all for the master. But as you're looking at the servant right now, you're seeing the servant. So he's devoted, but he's still, to some degree, an independent being. A person who's in a prison has absolutely no independence whatsoever. Which is why in halacha, if a person is forced to do something, why is oines achmona pat? If a person is forced he's forced to do a particular sin or forced not to do a mitzvah, then he's not held liable, because if you're forced, that act isn't me. That act isn't me, it's them doing the act. A servant does have an act. His act, but then is attributed and given, and is an extension of the master. But he's still in the Eved, he's still an Eved. But a prisoner has absolutely no identity at all. And any act that he's compelled to do, it's not even attributed to him. So spiritually, friends, this is a much deeper level of surrender. And the amazing thing is that as Yosef in these places, he's taking this as a divine message, and it elevates him to a greater degree of devotion. And therefore, when he was a servant, so He was the Ishmatz Koil, everything he did, Hashem granted success, but he did it. And you only see God in his life by putting all the pieces together. We see this is a person that Hashem has granted Atzlacha to. But when he's in the prison, he took one look at the guy, you saw the Eibishter. One look at him. Anything he did, it's not him. And his whole being expressed what? Hashem, a greater degree of complete surrender he achieved on a spiritual level, being not only a servant of God, but as it were, God's prisoner of light, prisoner of love. Now I want to tell you a story that you'll see how this illustrates. This is one of my favorite stories. Maybe you heard this before, maybe Lucy heard. There was a chassid, his name was a Mendel Futterfass. You've definitely heard of him. The Mendel Futterfass was a beloved, much beloved figure in Lubavitch. He was 14 years in the Gulag. And his crime, he was from the leader of the Lubavitch underground, etc. And he finally came out of Russia. Now, this story happened before he came out of Russia. He was already released from the Gulag, and he was in a place called Gorky in Russia. And the story was told by a Yid called Vyshetsky, there's two brothers. I think he's still alive in Kfar Chabad. He was a child, he was a kid, and he relates the following story. What's the story? So Mendel finally, after the 14 years, so he's there, and things are easing up a little bit in Soviet Russia. And eventually they released him. So there was some Chassidim living there, a handful of Chassidim. And it was an ordinary weekday. Listen to the story, friends. And Mendel sends a message. He says, I was the messenger, the kid, to go from house to house where the Chassidim lived. There was a handful, maybe 10. And Mendel's making a Farbrengen tonight. It wasn't a particular like the Pagir Chassidic holiday, and it certainly wasn't a Yom Tov in the classic sense. Okay, Mendel calls a Farbrengen, and calls a Farbrengen. So at the appointed hour, they didn't come at the same time, not to attract attention. This is still Soviet Russia. They came at different times, not to, right? And he remembers, the kid remembers what the Farbrengen was, vodka and some kind of like a porridge. So this was the whole the food. Good. So the Chaim, the Gunim, Farbrengen, Rav Mendel's very inspiring. And everybody, it's very beautiful, but everybody's like wondering, what is the reason? Why did he call the Farbrengen? The Farbrengen continues, another L'chaim, another L'chaim. Finally, the early hours of the morning, Rav Mendel took a lot of mashke. And they were probably asking him, Rav Mendel, what's his, what's my Yom Yamayim? Why today? So Rav Mendel told him as follows. He says like this, during his imprisonment, so everybody knows that the Russians, they used to interrogate at night. Menachem Begin famously, they called it the White Knights. Menachem Begin writes a book. He was a prisoner in the Soviet Union. And under the glaring bulb of the white light, they interrogate and try and break you down, etc. Okay, what did they want from Rav Mendel? They wanted to know the names of the teachers and where the funding is coming from, etc. The Chadorim, etc. So Rav Mendel said like this, and they used to. It was the interrogation was psychological abuse also, and they used to call him the most terrible things. You think you're a big tzaddik, you're nothing but an adulterer, and a thief, and they abused him. But listen to this. Rav Mendel said. He remembered a teaching from the Rebbe Rashab who said that evil says the truth. And the deeper the evil, the greater the emes. Now I'm just going to put in parentheses, Hitler, the greatest evil. What did he say? He said the Jew is fundamentally different. It's not just a subhuman being. For Hitler, the black, the gypsy, some of the Poles, they were subspecies. The Jew was not. The Jew was a cancer, a different order. And Hitler said, it doesn't matter if he's religious, he's not religious. A Jew is a Jew is a Jew. Hitler revealed in the most evil way the emes. that every Yid is a Yid, and a Yid that's in the Shama, no matter how much he assimilates, he remains essentially a Jew. So the Mendel is saying like this. So here they're abusing me, and I'm saying to myself, it's true. Adulterer, on his level, adulterer. His level, thief. On his level, murderer. And it means on some subtle level of thought and desire. So listen, friends, they're trying to crush him. This is what happens. They're trying to break him. And after the interrogation, he's going back to his cell. And actually, it's invigorating him because he's thinking about all the things they said. And as he's saying the Shema before he sleeps, or the Meida'ani, he's thinking of finding this at all within himself and fixing it. They're right. They're energizing him. They're energizing him. He found it, yeah. And he's doing tshuva on his level. But there was one thing they said to me that I couldn't find by myself. Couldn't find it. And what was that? So they told him, Futafas, you claim, everybody says you're the big hero of Russian Jewry, of the Chassidim. You could have gotten that. He was very instrumental, friends, in making the false passport, was one of his crimes, the false Polish passports, which my grandparents and mother and uncle, amongst all the other Lubavitchers, got out after the war. People that had died, Polish citizens, Yidden that had died. So they falsified the passports, the picture, because the Russian government allowed the window after the war that Polish citizens who fled to the interior of Russia can go back to Poland. That's how the handful of Russians, Chassidim, got out. There's this window, and the Mendel was instrumental and other Chassidim in making these false passports, and they were arrested and discovered. That was part of his crime. So you could have left. You could have made for himself. Why didn't you leave? Because it's all a big ego trip. You're going to stay behind, and you're going to be the big tzaddik and the big Rebbe. Rebbe, people come to you for advice and for brachas. That's why you stayed behind. Mesiras nefesh, sacrifice. On the contrary, it's a huge ego trip that you're going to be the Rebbe for the Chassidim. So Mendel said, for years and years and years, they said this. There's got to be truth to it. Everything's divine providence. And the Rebbe Rashav, the previous Rebbe's father, said, as I told you, the evil says the emes. And if they said it's got to be true, and he says, today, I found it by myself. He didn't say what, but today, he called himself Mendel. That's what they meant. He says, so now I can start to, in other words, I was a liar till now. This was a very serious accusation, and I didn't find it till now, which means I was living a lie, and now I can start truly working on myself. And that's why he called it Fabrengen, because now his true service of Hashem can begin. So similarly, Yosef, so I'm telling you, that Yosef as a servant, and then Yosef as a prisoner, this evoked within him, on the contrary, deeper levels of the service of Hashem. First is God's servant, and then a prisoner has no will of his own at all. It's all you. And what's our lesson? The lesson to us is, and this granted him success. Friends, what was the success that came as a result of Yosef being in the prison? He saved the world. He became the viceroy to Paroi. And he saved the whole world in a time of famine and hunger. It was instrumental in the greatest possible achievement and success in life. And how did it all begin? As a prisoner in the prison, which means in avoid, and that explains another thing, friends. An amazing story there. Just look at the story, how the whole thing progressed. The whole thing progressed because the butler and the baker are in the prison, and Yosef, one morning, he sees that their faces are down. And he asks, why your faces down? And they tell him about their disturbing dreams. You all know the rest of the story. He interprets it correctly. And then 2 years later, when Paroi has a disturbing dream, so the butler remembers, and Yosef is taken out of prison, and the whole world is saved, and etc. Think of the story for a second. He's in the prison. He's got his own problems. They're in the prison. And the prisons were not like the prisons today. And their faces are down. It's pretty normal that people faces like ponem zoifim. And yet, he has this interest he has the sensitivity and he's asking, why your face is down? This gesture of kindness, of sensitivity, that sets in motion the whole process by what? By the end of which he is taken out, becomes the viceroy. So this is indicative again of his complete self-effacement. Here he's in a prison, but he's reached this level of no ego at all. He's a prisoner of light, like a virtuous prisoner, not in a negative way, in the positive way. And therefore, as being so selfless, he sees another person there and whose face in the prison on a bad day is even worse. And they asked him, what's the problem? And that sets in motion the ultimate success. And the lesson is very powerful. The lesson is, friends, that as we started off saying, the vessel for Hashem's bracha is to be, first of all, a servant of Hashem. And then, not only a servant, but to recognize that prisoner, again, in the virtuous sense, you're doing. It's not me at all. It's not me at all. It's all Hashem's doing. I'm simply an instrument and nothing more. And I attribute, not that Hashem grants what I do success. It's what I'm doing. That's the first level. I do and Hashem grants success. That's the attitude. Here it's not even I'm doing. It's all Hashem's doing. I'm merely an instrument. I'm simply, and that's a choice we make to surrender our sense of independence and live everything I have, wife, children, livelihood, it's all Hashem's doing. To the greater degree that we surrender, the more we become out of the way and Hashem's blessings can come. And of course, when the blessings come, we use it to save the world, like Yosef did, to provide nourishment for the world, physically, spiritually, to help others on all levels. That is the ultimate ish matzliach, the ultimately successful person. All right, my friends. Have a wonderful